Good evening, members, officers, visitors and members of the public. I am Councillor Elliot Jays and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. The meeting will be recorded and live streamed on the Council's website. The recording will be stored on the website. Tonight's proceedings will be conducted in accordance with the Council's constitution, including procedural rules which are available on the Council's website. These procedural rules determine the rights and obligations of the applicant. I would like to remind everyone this is a meeting in public and not a public meeting. Item 1, emergency evacuation procedure. There's no planned evacuation drill this evening, and accordingly, if the alarm sounds, it's to be treated as a genuine emergency. The emergency exits are to my right and down the stairs, and to my left and down the stairs. Please do not use the lifts, and please assemble in the car park. Do not return to the building until instructed to do so. If anyone present needs assistance in evacuation, could you please inform me now so that we can make necessary arrangement should this happen? Thank you. Members must consider the application and anything that is said in the meeting concerning the application and make the decision based solely on their planning judgment and the information available to them. Following a decision by members, delegated authority is given to the planning officer to issue the decision notice. Any member of the council who is not a member of the planning committee may attend as a visiting member and may speak having given prior notification. Such visiting members may of course include all members, and while visiting members can speak on an application, they are not permitted to vote. Any member acting as a substitute on the planning committee must have undertaken the appropriate training before doing so. Members must remain in the meeting for the whole time that the item is being debated and should not vote on the item unless they have done so. I would now like to welcome our public speakers and remind them that you have 3 minutes to speak and an audible warning of time will be given when there is 30 seconds remaining. So item 2, apologies for absence and substitutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Mike Baldock, who is substituted by Councillor Richard Palmer, from Councillor Charlie Miller, who is substituted by Councillor Angela Harrison, and from Councillor Mike Henderson, who is substituted by Councillor Hannah Perkin. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Item number 3 is to invite members' declarations of interest. Does any member have anything to declare, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare that I'm a disclosable non-pecuniary interest, that I'm a current member of the Faversham Society.
Thank you. Councillor Booth?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Again, a disclosable non-pecuniary interest. I'm currently an executive board member of Kent Fire and Rescue and confirm for the minute that I had no dealing with the construction of Kent Fire and Rescue's supporting information for this agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have one. So my employer is mentioned as a statutory consultee. However, they've made no comment and I'm not part of that section of the business. Therefore, I have an open mind and can vote on this application. I'm just going to make sure people can hear us online and then we'll continue. Can anyone hear us online? Can everyone hear us online now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So we've done our declarations of interest. I'd like to remind the meeting that where it's possible that a fair-minded, informed observer, having considered the facts, would conclude that there was a real possibility that a member might be predetermined or biased on any agenda item, the member should declare this possibility and then leave the room when the item is considered. So move on to Part B reports to the Planning Committee, and that is the decision, and that's on application 23/503 812/sub, and that's land at Clevedley Hill. So I'd like to invite our first public speaker, and that is Parish Councillor Mike Newman, please. Okay. Sorry, we're going to do the presentation first, so if you can just hold off there.
Thank you, Chairman. This is actually going to be a two-person presentation. I'm going to firstly give a brief overview of the wider development and the nature of the application that's in front of members to determine. And I will then introduce Paul Gregory of BST&T Consultancy Services, who the Council have employed to review the Battery Safety Management Plan itself. The first thing is members should have two tabled updates in front of them. Tabled update 1 is the BST&T review of third-party comments and was circulated on Friday. Tabled update 2 was circulated earlier today, and that essentially pulls together further comments and objections that have been received by third parties and provides some commentary on this. So in terms of the overview of the development, the site at Cleve Hill is a substantial area of land which amounts to almost 500 hectares in size and is across the Nagdon, Cleve and Graveney marshes on the coastline of the Swale. Other than a small section in the far northeast, which falls within the administrative boundaries of Canterbury, the site is located in the parish of Graveney with Goodnestone. There's an aerial photograph of the site, and permission has been granted for a large-scale solar park on the site. When I say large-scale, it will be one of the largest, if not the largest, solar park in the country. And the park was approved by the Secretary of State as a nationally significant infrastructure project in 2020. A development consent order was made in May 2020 and came into force in June, and that sets out the works comprising the authorised development and a series of rights, requirements and provisions that relate to development of that land for a solar park. And the site is currently under construction. So the development that's authorised in the DCO is for up to 2 generating stations with a combined electrical output capacity of over 50 megawatts. And the consent order splits the development into 9 main elements, which are listed as works 1 to 9. There's only a couple of works that members need to be particularly concerned about tonight. Work number 1 authorises essentially the ground-mounted solar station and the solar array and related inverters, transformers and circuits. So on the drawing that is shown on the screen at the moment, the areas in green are essentially the solar array, and then the square area, which is in a lighter colour green, that is where the inverters, transformers and circuits will be provided, and that's within an embankment or bund which already has consent. Now, within that area, which is called works number 2, and I'll show that in a bit more detail here. So you can see that there, just to the east of the main solar array. That's essentially the development that has been consented so far, and that's part of works number 1. Works number 2 authorises within that area either an energy storage facility or it allows an extension of the ground-mounted solar panels within work number 1. And it's important for members to understand that that area of work allows either or of those scenarios, so an energy storage facility or an extension to the solar array. And it's a matter for the applicant whether they develop the site in accordance with option A or option B. And the applicant has proposed to construct an energy storage facility which is as permitted under 2A, works number 2A. And energy storage is defined in the development consent order as equipment used for the storage of electrical energy. Now, the development consent order sets out a series of requirements that the development must adhere to, which are broadly similar to planning conditions. So whilst consent has been granted for the solar farm, for the option of an energy storage facility, there are requirements that that the applicant must provide various further matters of detail to be approved. And those matters, whilst the development consent order is dealt with essentially by the government, the requirements are dealt with by the relevant planning authority, which is essentially SWAL. So the battery storage facility will be contained within this compound area, and members can see this drawing now. The storage facility is essentially the area on the left-hand side of the compound. The area on the right is the switching station, transformers and so forth that are all permitted under works number 1 to the general solar array on the rest of the site. So within this compound you have an earth bund which doubles up as a flood protection area, as I say, a switchgear building, an electrical compound. The battery storage facility comprises of 96 enclosures, and as you can see they're arranged in a uniform manner on the west side of the compound. Now, requirement 3 of the development consent order specifically requires the applicant to submit a battery safety management plan for approval, and this application that's in front of members is essentially for approval of that management plan. Just go through some photographs of the site so members can see so that's the compound area. It doesn't quite look like it on the photograph, but that is the bund, which is about 5 metres in height. What members can see under construction there are the transformers and switching station and works that are all connected with the solar array that's being constructed as works number 1. Nothing's been constructed in relation to the battery storage area. That's the entrance into the compound, so members can see the bund in a bit more detail there. That bund's about 4 metres in height. And then that's a photograph taken from the top of the bund. So again, you have the works that have already been consented on the right-hand side for the switching station and transformers, and the battery storage area will be on the left-hand side where the compound is at the moment. That is a photograph just to demonstrate the compound from the path along the coastline. So it's probably fairly difficult to see, but the compound is essentially within the bunded area that you can see here, and that's the switching station again there. If I could ask members to turn to paragraph 6.1 of the committee report. I just want members to have. Well, I'll go through that because it's important that members are clear about the nature of the application that's under consideration. The solar park has been approved by the Secretary of State, and as part of that approval, the option of installing an energy storage system on the site has been authorised. The specific location of the storage system within the compound area is identified as works number 2, which again accords with the details and drawings that were approved by the Secretary of State. And although the specific detail of those works are subject to requirements within the DCO, the principle of both the solar farm and the provision of an energy storage system within the solar farm in this location is authorised under the DCO. So it's not within the Council's powers to refuse an energy storage facility on the site, as that's already permitted under the DCO. What members are specifically being tasked to consider is the acceptability of the battery safety management plan, as has been submitted pursuant to requirement 3 of the DCO. And members will appreciate that the matter of battery storage and safety, particularly for an installation on the scale of this solar park, is a highly specialist topic. For this reason, the Council's employed a specialist battery storage and safety expert, Mr. Gregory from BST&T Consultancy Services, to advise on this. And in addition, members will note that the Council has received expert consultee advice from Kent Fire and Rescue Services, and that has been given significant weight in the assessment of this application. So I'll now invite Paul Gregory to give you an overview of the battery safety management plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So just to just give a brief overview into the process of the review. So it was really a 9-stage process. The first one was to do the preliminary review of the battery safety management plan as it stood and just look at it against the terms of the DCO and the content specification. Secondarily, then I dug down into the BESS system specifications and reviewed just basically basics from energy right the way through to conformance with a wide range of different standards and certifications. Then specifically, I reviewed the safety systems within those BESS enclosures and the system itself. Then I looked at the test data, the UL 9540A test data. It's sort of a large part of what I do directly for developers, owners, BESS OEMs, battery companies themselves. So I've got a sort of wide range of full-scale testing and UL test experience. So I just went through to look how the system complied and the sort of fire and explosion risk from that test data. Then I just evaluated the certifications for the complete system and how that complies with national and international requirements. Step 6 was to look at all the risk assessment data which is provided as part of NFPA 855/2023 requirements, such as hazard mitigation assessment, explosion system, performance assessment to NFPA 69, hazard and HAZOP, which was conducted by Cleve Hill themselves, just from the design stage, and just assessed how that compared to standards and requirements both nationally and internationally, including NFCC guidelines. Step 7 was a variety of communications with Kent Fire and Rescue, just to ensure that they'd received the requisite information from Cleve Hill, and to ensure that they were happy with that, and sort of that consultation process ended with a meeting with Cleve Hill and with Matt Deadman from Kent Fire and Rescue, just to ensure that all Kent Fire and Rescue's needs and requirements were met and no outstanding issues were needed to be resolved. Step 8 penultimate step was just RFI's request for information to Cleve Hill from the analysis and the work that I'd done on the battery safety management plan and all the specifications and data for the systems. And step 9, the final step, was basically requested amendments that I requested should be made to the battery safety management plan after the consultation process, and also feedback on the best safety of the systems and the operation procedures laid out in the management plan, and how I felt those related to both standards and best practice, which I see in a variety of national and international best projects. There were 10 conclusions and recommendations, rather, for revisions, which were fully met by Cleve Hill, which were laid out in the report in revision B. So I was fully satisfied that those were met and they're complied with. And as I noted in my report, often safety issues in any battery system or best system development like this is information that's not contained or not given. And certainly the level of data made available to me was fully commensurate with the highest level of expectations and standards and certifications that were required. The safety management plan, just briefly, it was just broken into sections as per the sort of DCO outline. Just obviously the introduction with just the background, the consultation process, statement of compliance with legislation. The main body of the report is the design response to risk, which is of vital importance, and it's a very thoroughly implemented documentation from that perspective. It was broken down into the main factors, so construction, operational, decommissioning, which are key different elements of safety and require different emergency response plans and protocols at those stages in development. So I was fully satisfied that the content and the protocols were fit for purpose. Because of the nature of the planning in this case and the fact that no construction or operation company have been appointed yet, there are commitments to site-specific modelling, risk assessments, which will take place when that process starts, which again I am fully satisfied that assessments such as fire and explosion risk assessments, which specifically look at the systems, the operations, the site. So what that will take into account, for example, potential for multi-container fires, to assess whether the agreed volume of water from Kent Fire and Rescue Service would meet the requirements for boundary cooling for the risk assessment judgments on fire and explosion risk. All the hazard and HAZOP processes are evaluated, all the safety systems are re-evaluated, and the original risk assessments for the system, so this is the system level assessment before it's located in any best site, there'll also be a review of that as well, and any consequence modelling that's required will be conducted. So again, I was satisfied that the plan meets those commitments and standards. And so the final areas were the battery transportation plan and the procedures in place, which again, we made some amendments to ensure that that was fully compliant with UK standards, rules and regs. And then finally, the environmental risk assessment, looking at things like emission modelling and a variety of topics. Again, vitally important in a site of any size. And again, I was satisfied that those assessments at this design stage were fully met, and that further assessments will take place that are site-specific under the different, both under construction, operation and decommissioning.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Councillor Mike Newman again to come to the floor.
Is that on? Yeah. Okay. Timer start. Chair, members. On the 14th of June 2017, 72 people died in the Grenfell Tower fire. Sir Martin Morbick, who led the inquiry, rightly praised the courage of the firefighters on the night, but also concluded that there would have been fewer casualties had the stay indoors strategy adopted by the fire brigade been reversed to one of get out sooner. Kent Fire and Rescue has acknowledged that a fire at Cleve Hill, should a very large battery storage facility be approved, is a when consideration, not an if. There are several models that show how a plume of toxic gas produced by such a fire might travel, and these models map the outcome dependent on the extent of the fire, the wind direction and so on. A number of these have been made available to you. They vary in detail, but generally agree that the close proximity of a daytime population comprising young children at the primary school and an elderly population in the village will lead to injuries and loss of life in these groups especially. Many of the houses in the village, including the Four Horseshoes Park for retired people, caravans for the more than 1,000 migrant farm workers, and the many historic properties are obviously not equipped to exclude toxic gas simply by staying indoors and shutting the windows, that being the advice likely from the fire service. The road infrastructure surrounding Cleve Hill is inadequate to support a simultaneous evacuation of the village, competing with the arrival of emergency services without both investment and careful planning. But there isn't an ill-formed evacuation plan. There is just no evacuation plan. But of course, in the event of an incident, an attempted evacuation will obviously take place out of the three little village lanes that connect Graveney to Faversham and Whitstable. I'm grateful to Swale for consulting with Kent Fire and Rescue and a battery expert. I'm sure that Cleve Hill have been cooperative and that some aspects of safety and battery spacing have followed due process. But the key risk in this entire development is the battery storage, and a well-known but perhaps disguised alternative of simply extending the solar array is available. Our responsibility is to the village, its population and its children. The village is extremely anxious and worried. The plans to communicate an incident to them or to help them escape or survive do not exist. Simply put, the villagers believe that they are clearly being treated as the acceptable collateral damage at the altar of your ESG ambitions. Of course, you must consider your responsibilities as a planning committee to the progression of an NSIP development and planning policy, but I urge you to withhold approval pending proper consideration of the viable, though less lucrative, alternative, but at the very least, the insistence of a much more considered emergency plan that properly articulates how public safety will be managed. The threat and risk to life and the environment dwarfs Grenfell. Please do not make this your legacy.
Next up, we have online Councillor Jeff Tutt.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. I would normally come to a planning committee and try and point out to you all the different bits and pieces that I feel you should be considering. But I I know with this application, there's so much information and you've already gone through it all, so you're very well aware of the safety concerns that you're being expected to basically override tonight. In the documentation, it's talking about 50 megawatts of storage, up to 350, and a possibility of up to 1400 megawatts. Just for you to put that into perspective, Richborough Power Station produced 360 megawatts. So you're talking 4 times the output of Richborough Power Station when it was running. Obviously, there's lots of documents you've got that explain all the risks, all of the problems there. My heart goes out to the officers who have had to try and navigate around this. Not a task that I would have liked to have taken on myself, because a lot of the information they've been given, although they've been given access to lots, doesn't really cut it. And the worries that everybody had are very, very real. And yeah, I wouldn't like to be in your position of approving this, where so many lives are going to be put at risk by a technology that catches a light for a pastime around the world, and they can't be put out. There's a ship burning off Rotterdam still, places around the world where these batteries just go up, and the amount of water being provided is insufficient. So there's lots of issues here that you don't have sufficient information, I believe, to make a judgment and a decision. And I would recommend that you either postpone this or refuse it, because it is not a sound proposal. Thank you for your time and appreciate your good work. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Tutt. Next up, we have Sir David Melville.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Faversham Society, Great, and 120 other objectors. The Cleve Hill proposed battery energy storage system will be exceptional in every respect. It's one of the largest in Europe and possibly one of the largest in the world, using batteries that have the highest risk of explosion. With almost weekly instant reports, it's beyond doubt that battery energy storage systems present unacceptable risks of fire, explosion, and the emission of toxic gases. Mr. Gregory made significant play on the importance of standards, but it's worth noting that for all of the explosions and fires in the past few years, all relevant standards were met. In making recommendations, officers have relied almost entirely on the advice of a consultant and the approval from KFRS. Our case is that both of these sources of advice are incomplete, severely flawed, and cannot be relied upon to give the committee the safety assurance that you need. We've argued that the consultant, and this is all in the papers we put in, BST and T, Mr. Gregory, has a clear conflict of interest. His reports have also not responded to our thousands of words of detailed technical evidence, nor do they take account of worldwide experience of BESS incidents. These inadequacies of the Battery Safety Management Plan remain unanswered, and consequently, it is not fit for purpose. Mr. Gregory has colluded with the developers and uncritically regurgitated their commercial information to you and that of the Chinese manufacturer, CATL. His report is not an independent, critical assessment. Of equal concern is the way in which Kent Fire and Rescue Service have deviated from the National Fire Chiefs Council guidelines, or where they're at odds with advice being given by other UK fire and rescue services. For example, the lack of alternative emergency vehicle access, suggesting that pedestrian access instead for a fire at a battery site the size of many football fields can be used. The lack of emergency evacuation plans we've heard about, and the total inadequacy of the fire water provision, with KFRS approving only 2 hours of the minimum level of water quantity for one of the largest BESS in the world. This when Merseyside Fire and Rescue Services reported the need they needed actually 26 times this amount of water over 56 hours to control the small 2020 Liverpool BESS fire.
Thank you, Sir David. Your 3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Councillor Gould, do you wish to speak on this one as the ward member?
Yes, I do, Chair. Thank you. The committee is being asked to consider the battery safety management plan for Cleve Hill. As the officer's report states, it's not about whether it's going to go ahead, but about the adequacy of the plan. And I think it's unfair to ask the committee to decide on this, as it's clearly a highly technical document, and judging its adequacy is difficult for non-experts. However, the Grenfell disaster already referred to has illustrated the dangers of assuming the advice given is sound, and the committee should carefully scrutinise the advice as given as well as they are able. It would have been helpful to have a constructive response from the Health and Safety Executive, but they've abdicated their responsibility. The HSE for Northern Ireland report by Atkins is much more useful and gives an overview of the risks in this technology. Members have not seen that. Searching on HSNE Atkins will bring it up. This is an evolving technology, so we need to be aware of the limitations of knowledge in setting of standards and adopt a precautionary approach. We need to be careful of being too accepting of the bald assertion that a standard has been met, which forms the basis of much of the BST&T report. The officer has given to members the advice to members that significant weight should be given to the views of expert consultees in the planning process. We have had the advantage of hearing from Sir David Melville, who is an acknowledged expert with published scientific papers in this area, and I would strongly urge the committee to use his and the Faversham Society's inputs as their basis for scrutinising the plan and the report. If the Chair would consider allowing members of the committee to ask him questions during the debate, I think it would greatly contribute to the soundness of their decision. In particular, I would like them to consider the risks of a hydrogen fluoride plume. While this is dismissed in the report, the HSNE Atkins report suggests there is a risk of concentrations immediately dangerous to life and health at about 240 metres from the site in certain wind conditions. The nearest home is 300 metres from the site. That is a very small margin for error, in my opinion. When I first came to Faversham, one of my patients was a veteran who was gassed with chlorine in the First World War. He had had a lifetime of living with the consequences of that exposure. Also, I would like the committee to look at the comments regarding the adequacy of the access, water supply, and the spacing of the units. Given the fires and explosions can arise from the failure of a single cell, the huge number of cells in an installation of this scale means the overall risk of an event occurring over its lifetime is vastly increased, and there is a high probability, acknowledged by the fire service, that this plan will be tested for real at some stage. It is therefore imperative that the committee are absolutely certain this plan is as robust as it could be, and if not, then it should be rejected. Thank you.
Councillor Chris Palmer, please.
Thank you, Chair. There are concerns about the lack of robust safety measures in this battery storage management plan. From what I've seen, the National Fire Chiefs Council published guidelines on fire rescue services on how to deal with grid-scale battery energy storage systems because of the potentially dangerous, deadly consequences, including death, chemical burns and blindness. This guidance provides the minimum fire service requirements for battery storage systems, but the Kent Fire and Rescue Service have not included a number of these, even though the installation is 300 times larger than the minimum that the guidelines were designed for. Matt Dedman, the Assistant Director responsible for Kent Fire and Rescue Service, has repeatedly stated that a fire at Cleve Hill is inevitable, yet he has not insisted that even the minimum standards are applied to the plan. A risk management plan has not been included. This would demonstrate that all risks had been considered and the mitigation required to control these risks. An emergency response plan has not been included. Graveney is a small village with a high proportion of retired and elderly residents. There is just one road through the village, so a robust and detailed emergency response plan is critical to ensure the safety and provide reassurance to the residents. At least 2 access points should be provided for opposite wind conditions or direction, yet only one vehicle access route is available at Cleve Hill. Kent Fire and Rescue say they can provide a firefighting capability on foot using the pedestrian access gate. This is completely unacceptable and unbelievable. Water supplies will depend on the size of the installation, and as a minimum, the guidelines recommend supplies of at least 228,000 litres. That is what is in the plan. We believe this is grossly inadequate, and the view is supported by other fire services in the country, including West Yorkshire, Hereford and Worcester Fire Services, who both say that approximately 5.5 million litres of water would be required. The guidelines also state that it is important to consider the location of the site, which is key in this case due to the remote location of Cleve Hill and the lack of large volumes of additional water in the immediate vicinity. Details of evidence-based testing and of system design should be requested. This has not been included, and all the testing will be undertaken by the supplier, CATL, a Chinese company, so I'm not sure how independent they are. Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire Service say that such testing should be completed and the test results provided for analysis. This testing may determine what additional measures are required that may impact the layout of the site, such as requiring increased space or between units.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Booth, thank you. First up to speak, I have Councillor Harrison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've read these papers and the extra papers and all the rest of it, and they're very limited on what we don't want it here. It isn't, well, you know, let's find some argument as to why it shouldn't be here. We are very, very limited parameters on how we make this decision. And my question was going to be, public safety came up in the first speaker, and evacuation reports, and I suppose one of my question is that the sort of thing that we have got to take into consideration when making our decision? All these things that we're being told aren't here or aren't good enough. So that's my question. My comment is I found it extremely offensive. Mr. Gregory has colluded with the developer. I found that extremely offensive. It's almost as bad as saying we're all taking brown paper envelopes, and I think it's beneath the person that actually said it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt, next, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm pleased Councillor Harrison said that, 'cause I was thinking exactly the same thing. I've looked at everything on here, and I completely see that everything we have as is independent reports, and I'm sort of pleased with the amount of information that we have got. It would just be good for officers to comment a bit more, especially on the evacuation plan. It would just be good to understand that a bit more. And then just some clarification, a bit more detail, maybe from Mr. Gregory. The Atkins report that's been mentioned, it would just be good to understand a bit more about that. And you know, as we haven't got it, why is that? Is it something that we probably should have, or is it something that is covered in everything that we've been told already? And another point that was just mentioned about other fire and rescue services saying something different for the amount of water needed. I just wonder if there's any comments on that at all, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so obviously I also submitted sort of response to interested parties that covered the sort of general subject topics, including sort of submitting some real-world battery data and some strategy from the International Fire Chiefs for use of water. So that's all available for people to read in their own time. Again, it's not pitched at a scientific journal level. It's just trying to convey a technical subject in a comprehensible manner for interested parties, okay? Specifically, no, so yes, so with regard to emergency response planning, basically until, as I referred to earlier, until the site-specific risk assessments are conducted, i.e. after construction starts, and all the systems, and there's a final layer of checking and consequence modelling on everything that will be on site, the emergency response plans are formulated leveraging that data, okay? So to make sure that that response plan, whether it's, and let's be honest here, so I've heard statements about how sites at significant distances away would be poisoned or impacted by explosions is simply not the case, okay? So first responders and site operatives are basically, that is the major life and safety risk, okay? And so all those site-specific consequence modelling and risk assessments need to be conducted. Police service, health service, fire service, if you have local resilience forums, all those sort of statutory bodies are consulted and will be involved in the formulation of those response plans. And likewise, you know, closest respondents, for example, school, obviously there's references to schools, which is 1.6 miles away, that any sort of care homes, sites that feel that, you know, in any sort of incident that there needs to be communication and a strategy in place, well, those will be taken care of in the emergency response plans. I don't know locally, freedom of information, exactly how that's conveyed in the public domain, but those will be conducted, and I'm not sure whether they're available, but ultimately they are for the use of first responders, okay? Now, if we take the Atkins report, okay, if you look at the modelling data in there, that the Hawley report for Cleve Hill uses the same HF production figure, 200 milligrams per watt hour, which is, well, which I will dig down into shortly, with a jet source release, and also it considers 2 BESS enclosures simultaneously on fire, which is one more than the Atkins report does. The COTM plume modelling, which is an ongoing project at the moment, which I submitted, actually uses very similar LFP battery fire test data from a number of BESS systems and LFP batteries, and it was put together in consultation with the UK Health and Security Agency to define the emissions that should be incorporated in that sort of analysis and modelling. So whilst the Hawley report, for example, does not have the data available to specifically model for this system, the COTM report is a very good example of the type of emissions that you would see, and that Hawley is more conservative, i.e. in the fact that more HF is being emitted and there are 2 enclosures at a time. Now, the Atkins report itself, it states in the report, it is emphasised that the intention was not to provide a comprehensive review or assessment, to provide an overall understanding of the key issues. Okay, so bearing in mind this was produced quite a few years ago, some of the flaws, and again why it wasn't directly referenced, is because it erroneously assumes that Fire growth is similar to a warehouse fire, so i.e. there's no battery fire data used to put together that report. Most importantly, the report assumes that all the electrolyte, i.e. fluorine releasing internal battery elements, is liberated as hydrogen fluoride. So if you actually burnt electrolyte in a tray, yes, about 98% is liberated as hydrogen fluoride. But the report that the 200 milligrams was taken from, the Larsen report from RISE in Sweden in 2017, actually just goes on to say, so again, references from the Faversham Society about hazardous substance consent controls and how much HF is produced. You know, that report makes very clear that battery cells, typically, it varies by cell design, only release around a third of the volume of fluorine as hydrogen fluoride. So the assumptions that are made both on the Atkins report and in some of the HSC comments are assuming that 100% of that is turning to HF when it's released out of the battery anyway at about a third of that level. Additionally, hydrogen fluoride is incompatible with a range of materials, and it reacts on contact with those materials and release hydrogen instead of HF, okay? So materials such as metals, glass, organic materials, so you're going to also have those in the battery constituents. So sometimes even before that's released, coming into contact with organic materials is not producing HF, okay? So rubber, ceramics, and more, so ceramics are often internally used in the battery cells and within the modules themselves, okay? The Larsen report tests other packs which produce far less levels of hydrogen fluoride, and these are referred to as wall losses, okay? So hydrogen fluoride concentrations decay quite quickly in enclosed volumes due to reactions with surfaces and solid particles, as I just described, okay? So again, by using the 200 milligrams per watt hour, which is just a single, which is cell level, so it's just been going directly into the gas tubes, it is not a realistic by far, so it's probably sort of more than tenfold statement of actually what would be released, okay? So it also uses an LFP pouch cell, which is not used in any BESS system. So again, you need to compare like with like. So just without getting hopefully too technical, so just to say that also the vapor release prediction, again, because the Atkins report had no battery data, is more than double the level from that actual cell that it refers to, because I've personally tested and I reviewed about 8 other different tests which quantify it. He categorises it as being 500 litres. Well, it's less than half that level, okay? So, yeah, the report goes on to state that the analysis presented is considered to be conservative and the heat release rates like to be higher, et cetera, there are conservatives in the magnitude of the HF source term, which there certainly are. They're not based in reality. And the assumption is that the HF is released over 30 minutes and that people remain exposed in the plume rather than escaping. So from a perspective of modelling a realistic HF risk, it's out on many, many factors because basically it doesn't leverage any actual battery data, okay? And as we say, if we want to drag it back to Hawley, that production level of HF with the jet source, which is used in the Atkins report, they are both similar. And the point would be that Hawley actually is modelling 2 enclosures on fire at one time, whereas the Atkins report only has 1, okay? So, and again, the Atkins report modelling was about 2 or 3 pages of data. You can see the Hawley report, how extensive that is, and actually that was revised with inputs from myself, which made that more realistic based on actual battery data to very similar cells and modules which are actually integrated in the Cleve Hill site. Okay, so with regard to water systems. So all the cases stated and extrapolating volumes of water occurred from incidences where the BESS enclosures did not incorporate internal water sprinkler or water spray systems. Okay, sometimes there wasn't an emergency response plan for the fire service, so there was no strategy agreed. So basically, they were going into the field a little bit blind in some of those cases. Okay, Cleve Hill does have a dry pipe spray system. So with regard to the provision of water on site that has been discussed, that system, so the Fire and Rescue Service now has established strategies that because data is available, so you can see in all the adjacent containers if there's any increase in temperatures, whether the fire is at risk of propagating to another container, they can take real-time decisions whether any intervention needs to be taken. Okay, so with regard to that, if they felt that a fire was getting out of control in a container, then they could hook up to the internal spray system, which basically uses between, depending on the litre flow. So the system there can range from 200 litres per nozzle per minute to 1,000 litres, which translates to either just 12,000 through to 60,000 litres per hour at the top level. Okay, so you wouldn't turn a hose on, as was witnessed at Liverpool. Basically, you will water damage any modules that aren't actually in thermal runaway, and you're actually going to prolong that event, and you're using a lot of water which won't achieve the desired effect, in the fact that actually if you'd let it burn and just cool the adjacent equipment, the timeframes would have been a lot quicker. Okay, and just to give you some idea from full-scale burn tests, which I've alluded to in my reports, that have taken place with similar systems with 280 ampere as opposed to 306 ampere, so that's 10% less energy in them, is that actual heat flux data was captured at different distances from a fully consumed BESS enclosure, and typically they're used to validate spacing on site, and these systems are typically located 7 or 10 feet away from each other, so far closer than 6 meters, and sort of the external temperatures recorded at 7 feet were maximum of 280 centigrade, which is 5 kilowatts per meter squared if you're looking in the heat flux terms. And that was just at peak heat, so that wasn't constant, so this was a 6-hour event. So this was just at the height of the heat there. So the internal door was measuring 120 centigrade, and the battery modules were at 60 centigrade with no cooling, which is far below the temperature it would be required to go into thermal runaway. So typically we're seeing full-scale burn tests that are validating spacing. So these systems were the same types of battery, but 20 or 40% of the size of the enclosure here. But typically, the two types of tests that were conducted are equivalent to the full burnout of one of the racks in the BESS enclosures that we see here. Okay, so if the fire service decide to directly tackle it, you would use the internal system. Again, they would only use that water for boundary cooling to cool adjacent equipment if they felt that there was a risk that the heating was too much. As I've already stated, the final site-specific risk assessments conduct further fire and explosion analysis. So if that analysis finds that more water will be required based on that data, then it will be shared with Kent Fire and Rescue, and that can be integrated on site. And talking about coming through on foot, the reason for that being is that hydrants have been integrated near those entrances, so there's room for as many water tanks as you would need, but the point would be that those hydrants allow for easy coupling and discharging of the hoses through there. You don't need to take a fire truck through there. But again, you know, based on the fire and explosion site risk, if the modelling shows that a second ingress-egress point would be required, then that would be the advice that both the owners and Kent Fire and Rescue would go with. You know, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. Okay. Sorry, it's getting technical, but I think it's very useful here.
I wonder if that answers Councillor Hunt's question.
It does quite a lot. I'll just come back on one thing. It's just understanding that obviously there's the water that was mentioned there, and we've got Kent Fire and Rescue Service that say that the guidance states are 1,900 litres per minute. And they're satisfied with that. What discussions have there been with the water coming up? I think it's probably southeast water, that area. If there's a need for this water, the fire are happy with it. Do we know that that actually can be delivered to that site into those hydrants?
So it's delivered from water tanks. So whatever the volume that's agreed, those are stored in water tanks, and then that's delivered through a hydrant system, so it's not linked up to the mains. Okay.
Thank you. Next up, I have Councillor Golding, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. Am I okay to run with them? Okay, thank you. My first question, given the site's location and the fact notification letters were sent to parish councils and local residents, it was disappointing to note that Faversham Town Council were not consulted. Just wondered if there could be an expansion on why that happened, given the proximity of Faversham to the site. My second question, it was disappointing and astonishing to see that the HSE didn't respond twice when approached by the officers. And I note that the officers were encouraged to seek their own advice. Was that advice received, and was it received in the form of the BST&T report? And my third question, thank you. Given what's been presented to us this evening, and I'm going to be honest now, as a layperson, even though I trained as an electrical engineer a long, long time ago, I find the science overwhelming, and I think that's a lot to be asking of members. I might be talking out of turn there, but just talk about myself. So, given what's been presented this evening, can it be demonstrated, and in plain English, if it's possible, that the expected environmental standards would be adhered to? And also, I note that the risk assessment wouldn't commence until the work had started. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Andy, are you taking them ones?
Yeah, we're just checking the consultations that took place in respect of any consultation to Faversham Town Council. The issue with the HSE, yeah, I mean, that's incredibly frustrating. They're a named consultee, as are Kent Fire and Rescue, on the requirement in the development consent order. We've consulted them. We can't compel them to provide a response. We didn't receive one. We chased them for a further response and have received nothing of value. We made our frustrations clear to the Planning Inspectorate, who are essentially the examining authority with these applications. They advised us that we should seek our own advice, and yes, you're correct, our own advice is essentially in the form of the BST&T consultancy advice that's been received. I'm slightly unsure what you mean by the expected environmental standards. Would you mind just explaining that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, that were referred to in the report, and like the risk assessment. Who polices that work? Does that make sense?
So when you say who polices, you mean in an incident or?
As the work is commencing, because you talked about the risk assessment wouldn't be put in place until the work actually started.
So all the risk assessments for the phases of construction, for example, are in place. So the risk assessments, we're talking here specifically about fire risk assessment, explosion risk assessment, just the secondary assessments of all the previous risk analysis safety assessments that have taken place, okay? So that's just to validate that and all the safety systems. With regards to the environmental, so, you know, specifically the information that I've shared on HF emissions and the plume modelling examples, yes, I would be satisfied that the IDLH, which is again discussed in my response to sort of interested parties, third-party queries, at respondent distances is below the requisite levels, i.e. will be no health impacts on respondents. Now, the way it works and the emergency response plan will be put together, if there is, so again, I obviously haven't been privy, I wasn't involved in the project in the early days. Matt Dedman's not here. So personally, as somebody who's been involved in a wide range of battery full-scale testing, fire and explosion testing, a whole load of different fire suppression projects as well, I don't think fire and incident is by any means guaranteed here. And if it is, that typically in an emergency response plan, you will have monitoring at site boundaries to measure the levels of emissions, okay? And also, for example, if there was felt that, so again, typically any plume modelling that I've seen based on actual full test data, nothing over 200 metres has been at any level of any threat to members of the public, okay? Just to make that clear. So if people are at site boundaries, i.e. before respondents, if levels are of concern, or again, there are sites of concern, that the emergency responders will be monitoring the air quality in those areas. And again, if advice was needed to be given with regards to stay indoors, then that could be communicated effectively, and there'll be channels of communication to ensure that that happens.
Have we got an answer on whether Faversham Town Council were consulted? Other than that, does that answer your question? We'll get back to you on the Faversham Town Council.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next up, I have Councillor Palmer, please.
Thank you. I won't dwell on things because I was going to raise the concern about the HSE. They would have experts to call upon, but it is, as you say, you can invite them, but they don't have to respond. But I did hear that, I think as Mr. Gregory said, that Cottam, the site at Cottam, is that of a similar size to the one at Cleve Hill? And I take it you was the consultant for the local authority there. And it does seem a bit strange that in the modelling you've said if it shows that there should be a second entrance. I would have thought this would have been part of this plan anyway, which doesn't read very well to say it's going to be, well, we might consider it as an add-on later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Councillor Perkins, please.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I wanted to touch a little bit on what Councillor Gould already kind of picked up, that yourself at the beginning of this meeting, Chair, said that we should make our decisions on this application based solely on planning judgment, which is how we open every single planning meeting. But there's really nothing about what we're discussing this evening that has any bearing on our planning judgment at all. None of us have sat through planning training to look at fire management plans for battery explosions. Like, that's not something that we've ever had to encounter. So I find it very difficult to understand how we can use our best planning judgment to be able to make a decision about something that is so separate from planning. I am going to dwell a little bit on HSE not responding, because it was the Secretary of State that approved this development. So where is the government accountability in making sure that our decisions are made with regards to the safety of our communities? If the HSE aren't going to respond, I don't think we as a council should be pushed into making a decision without having their input. I'm also not entirely sure, and I wonder if the officers can help me on what comes next if the committee is minded to say that we don't feel comfortable in saying that we're going to say that the plan is safe. So I've got some specific questions on the actual report. So in 6.9 it says the BSMP sets out the compound comprises are impermeable bunded area, but how does the bunded area become impermeable at groundwater level? So is there any facility to stop any runoff going through into the water table? 6.10, it relies quite heavily on compliance standard for batteries, but we know that and other electric batteries have followed compliance standards and still caught fire. We know that electric scooters aren't allowed on trains anymore for that exact reason, and they all complied to standards. 6.13, the KFRS have raised that they don't have any issue with the carriageways, but if anyone has driven around that site, those carriageways are incredibly thin, and I just don't understand how there can be no concerns about that personally at all. In 6.15, KRFS says that deflagration and mechanical fans will greatly reduce the risk of vapour cloud, but greatly reducing and preventing are completely different. And I know, Paul Gregory, you said that if there was any beginnings of concern for residents, that would be communicated through communication channels. But there's no evidence within the plan about what those communication channels might look like. How are we going to communicate that with the residents locally if anything was to go wrong? So I have so many questions about it, and I'm as a person who is not well versed in the physics and chemistry of battery storage units, I think that HSE not responding when they have the technical capability to do so is negligent. Thank you.
Just to answer the question about whether Faversham Town Council were consulted on the application, they were. In terms of some of the questions that Councillor Perkin has raised, like members, planning officers aren't well versed in battery safety. It does feel a bit like this has been dumped on the council by through the development consent order, but we are where we are with it, and we have to deal with it. We've brought in an expert consultant. We've had quite detailed comments from Kent Fire and Rescue, and members I'm sure are aware of this, but they provided some detailed comments which are attached as Appendix 1 to the main report. Those comments actually came about from both some local objectors and myself as officer, questioning some of the common themes that were coming through in the representations that we were receiving, seeking further clarification from Kent Fire and Rescue Services on those matters. So they provided some detailed comments there, and quite clearly in those comments they've concluded that the battery safety management plan is acceptable from their perspective. That includes things like access to the site, the number of access points, so on and so on. They're clearly, it should be regarded as a key consultee. They're a named consultee in the DCO. They are, you'd like to think that Kent Fire and Rescue are experts in fire safety. And it's very clear that when we're considering expert consultee comments that we should give them significant weight. I understand fully how members are feeling in considering this. It's probably not dissimilar to how I felt in going through the application and trying to work on it as well. But we have detailed comments from our expert consultant and from the key consultee, obviously if we were to take a decision to refuse the application, it would be the same as with a planning application. We would have to give sound planning grounds and reasons and be able to substantiate those at an appeal. There is a prospect, if we refuse it, that the applicant has the right to go to appeal. And in doing so, they obviously have the right, as all applicants do at appeal, to consider whether the council was reasonable or not in making its decision and seek costs if it's held that the council were not reasonable or couldn't sustain their reasons for refusal. So we have to be wary of that, and in light of the advice that we've been given from people that know about this, that's why we are where we are with the recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. But just to come back on that, sorry, are you okay? No, that's fine. Just to come back on that, you said that they would expect it would go to appeal, and they would expect a sound planning reason to say that is the reason for refusal, but battery safety plan management falls so far outside of what the normal kind of planning reasons that we would give. Surely we're kind of between a rock and a hard place, really, because there surely is not a valid planning reason because it's outside of that remit.
Yeah, I think on a different level, you could, obviously this is a highly technical subject matter, but you could compare it, to advice that we receive from other consultees on standard planning applications, say for example air quality impacts, and getting comments from environmental health, or flooding issues and getting comments from the Environment Agency. We would, in those two fields, I don't profess to be an air quality expert or a flood expert, but they are conventionally more part of the planning process than we are, than battery management and battery safety. I think the key theme is that it's clear that we should be giving weight to consultees who are experts in that field, and we have received what I would suggest is very clear advice from Kent Fire and Rescue Services that the battery safety management plan is acceptable. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll be quiet in a minute. That's helpful. Given that it's a decision that has been passed through the Secretary of State, so the Secretary of State have said this is permitted development, surely not having a response from HSE, which is at the same level as the Secretary of State, makes it very difficult for us to have the final say on it. I just think that's a completely missed step in terms of letting us know exactly how they feel about it, because they're an important consultee and they haven't responded. So how are we, as a small local authority that have been, this application's been put on us, how are we supposed to make a sound and prepared decision without the guidance of that level of authority?
Yeah, so just to help you out on that, it is not just Cleve Hill. So this is basically the approach of the Health and Safety Executive, is that they won't on any BESS project, even though, so I believe actually that probably things are going to change at a government level soon, but basically that no project I've been involved in will they comment. So that is an across the board. Okay, so it's not just they're leaving Cleve Hill out to dry. That's just the current situation. Now, that may change, sort of moving forward, but that's consistent HSC input that I see into any project.
Last time.
Promise last point. I think we should have to think about why they don't respond to any of those. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions to start with. One is are we looking at a fire safety for the 50 megawatts? Is that just confirming that? Is that what we're looking at now? Yeah, if that's all right. Yeah.
Yes, so you're looking at the site as it is for the 90 litre containers.
Which is 50 megawatts.
So it's 350 megawatt hours.
Right.
Okay. So that released over a 2-hour period to the grid. So whether it's a 150 or 175 actual megawatts. Yeah.
Okay, and then it could be increased to 1,400. Is that right? If we agree the safety now, just trying to get my head around that.
So the battery management safety plan sets out that there may be proposals in the future to increase that. The safety plan does make clear that that's not something that this safety plan is considering at this stage. We have actually taken legal advice on what would happen if they did seek to increase the battery storage facility. And the advice we've received is that provided that the overall storage capacity is still within the realms of the details that were provided to the government as part of the nationally significant infrastructure project, that can be considered, but it would be an amendment to the requirements on the development consent order, so it would require submission of further details and consents to the council to do that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's answered that one. Regarding the pit, are combustible fuel vehicles entering that pit? In other words, a bunded area at any one time? In other words, petrol vehicles or diesel vehicles? Or...
Do you mean when it's operational?
Yeah.
Not in the event of
No, just in general, yeah.
So the operator hasn't been appointed yet, so all the risk assessments are based around sort of operational processes, but the actual logistics have not been decided. So I couldn't tell you, okay, but that will be part of when the operators are appointed, once they know what the daily or the weekly site access is, then that's included in the site-specific risk assessments. But obviously, until that operator has been appointed, like with construction, you can't fully carry out those risk assessments until you actually have your operations and logistics finalised.
So going back to that, on the risk of fire, if a combustible vehicle, has there been any testing or anything if there's a fluid escape, combustible fluid escape, and then we end up with multiple units affected?
So that's what the risk assessments take place. But typically on a BESS site, you wouldn't allow any vehicles within a certain radius of any of the BESS containers. So just because more of a worry of that is you wouldn't want a vehicle driving into a battery container, because the impact is more likely to lead to thermal runaway and a bigger threat than a fuel leak would. So, for example, these containers must have a minimum of 1 hour full thermal insulation, so be able to fully withstand any sort of fire effect at least 1 hour. Okay. So that's even if I couldn't, again, that's the operational site risk assessments. I have, they have not been appointed, nobody can say, but I could say pretty confidently that vehicles will not be going with in any sort of danger radius of those components.
And out of interest, is ever terrorism any thought? Is that ever factored in if someone, explosion or something occurs? Or?
Yeah, as laid out in my report, I actually put a table of the type of risks that are considered.
Okay. And just a last one, just a point. So we're obviously agreeing a battery safety. How about how's the point, do they have to put, I suppose what I'll do is I'll come back round in a different way. Looking at the units at 380 megawatts, that's roughly 9,000 electric cars. With current technology, with vehicle to grid and smart controlling systems, is it something that will be sort of out of date within a fairly swift period of time, and also raises quite a risk and a corporate control of funding rather than allowing individual control of power, which could be used with vehicle to grid systems? So then we'd have vehicle transport as well as storage, whereas with that it's just solely for storage. So I think it would be quite good to look at V to G rather than looking at safety on a massive scale for a very large battery storage system. But that's just my opinion. Cheers.
Next up, Councillor Speed, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm deeply troubled by this and by the enormity of the decision we're being required to make this evening. It's the UK's biggest solar farm. The battery storage proposed will be amongst the world's biggest. There have been 65 fires or explosions worldwide in similar battery storage systems, and experts are saying that a blaze or explosion at some point at Cleve Hill is a statistical certainty. It's really complex and technical for us as lay people to determine, but a few observations. The advice from Kent Fire and Rescue doesn't appear to be robust. It doesn't comply with the National Fire Chief Council's battery storage systems guidance. For example, the guidelines state that at least 2 access routes are required for vehicles. Cleve Hill only has 1, and as we've heard earlier, the suggestion is that firefighters can tackle the fire on foot, which seems totally inadequate given the potential scale of an outbreak. The toxic plume dispersion modelling appears to be incomplete. It's only been done for fire, not for an explosion. This is obviously serious because a modest wind could carry a lethal toxic cloud to Graveney Primary School within 1 minute. The hydrant supplies appear to be inadequate. As we've heard, the proposal is for just over 200,000 litres, whereas if you look at other best fires in Australia, Belgium and indeed Liverpool, it was more like 5 or 6 million litres were required to prevent the fire from spreading. And I'm not sure what happens to all that contaminated water either. Presumably it ends up in the Swale estuary or soaks into the water table. We've heard there's been no input from the Health and Safety Executive, and I share the concerns that have been expressed already. There's also been no input from the Environment Agency, which I also find perturbing. The BS-TNT report doesn't address some of the concerns that have been raised by third parties, and I noted that it initially contained redacted information on the grounds of confidentiality. Upon request, that was then unredacted, and it was revealed to be material copied and pasted from the battery manufacturer without any critical appraisal. In terms of the balance of the debate this evening, we have in the room Sir David Melville, who is an acknowledged expert, and he's been restricted to 3 minutes, whereas Mr. Gregory has been granted unlimited time to put the opposite case. There is no evacuation plan, there's no risk management plan, and for me, there are just too many unanswered questions for me to feel confident about agreeing with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Speed has picked up on quite a few of the points that I was going to make, especially the last couple of points that he made, so I won't go into those. We've all seen, maybe not personally, but footage of e-scooters exploding, causing massive fires in homes and what have you. We've seen car batteries, which again are lithium ion. Just one faulty cell can cause a fire. And if you speak to any recovery agent about how they deal with those fires, and you look at footage, you'll have at least 3 to 4 fire tenders there just for one car battery. And these batteries are significantly more and significantly larger than car batteries, etc. And when they do take these car batteries away, they have to stick them in what they call a dunk tank for at least a week to 10 days in order to stop them flaring up again when they actually come to be dismantled. So I have a lot of concerns about these actual batteries, and also I have concerns about their proximity to the switchgear, etc., that collects the power from the panels and distributes it to the grid. If one or more of these batteries were to explode, and they cause a secondary explosion within the switchgear, I don't know personally what the catastrophic results of that might be to the the national grid system. Could that actually cause some sort of feedback that could black out half of Kent, Essex and South East London? These are all points that we don't know the answers to. The water tank system that Mr. Gregory refers to, I would have thought that they would have to be backed up by mains water, especially as we've heard that other fire services have said that rather than a couple of 100,000 litres, it takes several million litres to deal with these fires. And as for these tanks, have they got planning permission? This is something we don't, okay, the Secretary of State has given planning permission for the overall development, but has he given planning permission for these massive great tanks to store the water? And the more I hear this evening, the more I'm actually getting confused about things. Reading through this report several times, again, as a lot of people says, it's so technical that as a layperson, I'm struggling with it. And to be honest, with these risk assessments that have been mentioned, the site risk assessment, the operator's risk assessment, and all the rest of that still haven't been produced yet because there's no they haven't started construction, and there's been no site operator allocated. I would suggest that this is deferred until we can get these reports. Thank you, Chairman.
So all the procedures and how those plans will be formed and formulated are in the Battery Safety Management Plan. Okay? And secondarily, with regards to comparing to e-scooters or cars, you have to compare like with like. The battery systems are far more sophisticated. The reason sometimes a lot of water is sprayed at cars is because of the location where that incident takes place. So it could be in a major road network, in the town, in a built-up area, okay? The thing you need to understand about cars is that by legislation and by just operability, those battery packs need to be watertight. So of course you're actually not going to have any beneficial cooling effect because unless there's been potentially a major collision or the battery packs come apart, you can't actually access those cells. With the battery energy storage system, there's a dry pipe spray system which is basically directed either side of the module, so if you've got any flaming, that can be discharged, and basically what it does, it knocks down the flames and slows the rate of propagation and the heat that's generated within those containers. It's a very, very different situation, and the battery systems are very different, and they have far more rigorous controls and processes and basically ability to stop the situation occurring, okay, or monitoring it to occur, and to also exhaust explosive gases. You know, it's all shown in both the battery safety management plan, the answers to your questions, the technical, and in my reports as well.
Thank you. I know the firm was mentioned. I'd like to get to the end of the debate and hear from everyone before we discuss that topic. So next up, Councillor Winkless, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I came into this chamber tonight and I called with a very open mind on this very complex issue. And listening to this debate so far, I'm going to find it very difficult to go the officer's recommendations, as has been echoed tonight by many members in this chamber. I think there is a lot more information we need on the safety of these batteries, especially with the large scale, the largest in Europe, I understand. So the debate no doubt may go on a little bit longer to make my mind up, but at the moment I'm tending to go against the officer on it. Thank you.
Councillor Stephen, please.
Thank you, Chair. We talked a lot about the batteries and the consequences of them going into what they call it, meltdown or whatever. I want to look at the report from the Fire Brigade, Fire Rescue Service. They put a lot of comments in there, and it's comment 3 regarding suppression systems. Now, they've asked the question here is that, however, the battery units all include pre-fitted gaseous suppression systems, which can only be discharged once. So the common occurrence of subsequent reignition would occur in an unprotected unit. I mean, that's fair enough. And the response was given. I don't know who gave the responses. I take it's our expert or someone, that the gaseous suppression system have become standard on many BESS. There is a value in the system if used to extinguish fires not involving cells, e.g. wiring, and to prevent heat from these fires causing cells to enter thermal runaway. That's the word I was looking for before, thermal runaway. They are not effective on cells in thermal runaway, and I can see the reasons why. The system is built to prevent heat getting to the batteries for that to occur. So they would use, as you say, water to suppress the heat. My concern is that the system is designed to ensure discharge of the suppression system will only take place in the event of an electrical fire and not a thermal runaway event. And there are manual overrides to activate or isolate the system. Now, I've had experience of high voltage fires. I work for British Telecom, and a number of times I've seen high voltage cables. These are the ones that are serving the substations before you get your 240 volts, explode. And they've actually melted anything within a 2 metre diameter of where the cable is. And I can assure you a copper cable ends up as like an iron rod, solid. So the effect is devastating. I've also witnessed a telephone exchange in danger of fire through the mains power coming in to the exchange, and they do take very high voltages, and we had the electricity board in there servicing it for us. They went to lunch, and lo and behold, we could smell burning. And I entered the room, and this huge great big cable, I mean, it's the size of my thighs, and I've got big thighs, sparking and in flames. We called the fire brigade, and they would not do anything. They would not enter the building. They would not apply any water. We had to get the power turned off first. And that had to be done manually. And it took 2 hours for the electricity board to turn up. Thankfully, once the power was switched off, they were able to tackle the fire, which didn't actually burn the building down, thankfully. I was in charge of that building at the time, I'm extremely worried. But my concern here is that they're saying there's a manual override to activate systems or isolate the system. First of all, I want to clarify what systems and what it's all about. But before you answer that one, are these sites manned?
Yes, so there's a control room there, okay. So bearing in mind, so this is just wiring to the battery modules. This is not grid scale and energy. So it will just be, so basically it's a 230 volt system. Just they're plug and play modules, okay. So the aerosol system is there to basically for a fire in that wiring. It's PCS integrated with the battery management. We've got gas detection in there, smoke detection, heat detection, so that you do not want an aerosol discharge because basically that can create explosive conditions. So if there is a thermal runaway that the gas exhaust system operates to exhaust the explosive gases out of there, for wiring for battery energy storage system, aerosol systems have demonstrated that they're able to extinguish any sort of electrical incident within those battery containers.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any backup systems there? Because obviously if we get an electrical fault and it causes a fire, you've got the problem of how do we activate the other systems to dissipate this gaseous.
Yeah, so the backup systems, normally it's 2 hours plus 24-hour reserve, okay, and that's for all the detection systems. The gas exhaust has to be done by NFPA 855 standards. You have to have redundancy and resiliency.
So you're confident that in the case of any sort of electrical breakdown, the manual system can be operated in what sort of time period?
It also has reserve power, okay? So if that breaks down, you've got reserve power for at least 2 hours, in which case the control maintenance can come and sort of take care of any issue on site.
Okay, next up, Councillor Watson, as we haven't had you already.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to be very, very brief. The last time I did science was over 40 years ago, and the only thing with batteries was making a potato clock. So this tonight, to be perfectly honest with you, Chair, has totally blown my mind completely, and how we can, as councillors, be expected to make a decision on something that is going to make a huge difference to the lives of our residents is beyond me. This is too technical for me. I'm very sorry. And thank you, Mr. Gregory, for giving me all the information he gave me. I'm afraid it whizzed over my head and will never be seen again. Health and Safety Executive have got a lot to answer here because they've basically dropped the ball and they've thrown us to the wolves on it. It's going to be extremely difficult to make a decision on this. When it comes to, I think it's something like, is it Halon gas suppression system? I presume that there is something like that lined up, should anything happen. Risk assessment, I'm really concerned about evacuation plan for our residents and how they will be advised as to what's going to happen. The health and safety of not just the residents, but of the people that are working there. You said there's going to be a manual control room, so I would hope that their health and safety would be looked after. But with the information we have, Chair, as I said, it's gone completely over my head. I wouldn't class myself as too much of a daft woman, but this is beyond me completely. I know when we sit on the planning committee, we look at loads of things to do with planning, but as Councillor Perkins said, I think this is way beyond the realms of planning. So I'm having a bit of difficulty with it, Chair. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Golding.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I also echo the comments Councillor Perkin made, especially around planning judgment. Just some of my observations. In the past, there's been blind faith in expecting government to do what is best for local communities. And as we all know, that's been seriously tested and is continuing to be tested. And Grenfell is an example. There's even a more local example, the sewerage issues in Whitstable. I'm also, the more I've heard this evening, and again echoing what other councillors have said, and also taken on board what Councillor Gould and the councillors from the two parishes, I don't believe that the fears and anxieties that are being allayed that the residents are currently experiencing. And the more I've heard and continue to hear, I'm becoming more confused, I'm becoming uncomfortable and feeling I'm not convinced or confident that the risks to the residents has been considered and is okay. And I believe that that's really important that we get that right. And I would concur with Councillor Clark that maybe the consideration of the decision being deferred so that reports can be compiled that in plain English. So as councillors, we could understand fully the risks. We have two reports from two different people. Again, as a layperson, to me, they don't align. And again, I struggle with that. Both experts in their field. And yeah, I do struggle with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, please.
Thanks, Chair. Now, no disrespect to you, but it's a pity the old chairman wasn't chairing, isn't it? Because we could have had his expert view. It seems to me that there are very limited parameters on which we have to make a decision. On the safety management plan of the batteries. But there are a hell of a lot of other issues that have been raised and are concerning members to the extent they're not happy about making a decision. But in terms of the issue before us, they are irrelevant. They're not irrelevant per se, but they are irrelevant to the decision on the safety plan. And I share some of those concerns later down the line. We have a new doctor's surgery that will be built in Sheerness. We could not, we could have said, well, where's the risk assessment? Where's the evacuation plan? Well, it ain't built yet. How can we do that? Well, if you don't let me have the plans, I can't agree it. It's the wrong way round. But what concerned me is that they are irrelevant to this particular issue. And I don't have a problem making a decision on this particular issue on the parameters that we are supposed to make that judgment. And with the assurance, if we believe it, it's up to us whether we believe or not the assurances we are being given. Outside of that, somewhere down the line, this thing will be built. It's got permission. Is this it? Tonight it's the safety plan for the batteries. Who, when, might get to see, I'm not going to say approve because I don't think there's approval necessary legislatively, the evacuation plan, I think it's the LCF, or the risk assessments, that's a business thing. So I suppose the concerns that members have on those areas, I also share. but I'm also aware that I don't think that that's part and parcel of you running your business. That isn't part and parcel of the planning permission for the battery safety plan. And I think maybe officers could be quite specific on the issues that we are expected to make our decision on, and risk assessments and evacuation plans are not part of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next up, I have Councillor Hunt, please.
Thanks, Chair. And I did initially put my hand up because I had a question about when things change and the batteries and they're replaced and the end of life, but I have now found it, and it is all covered in the report, that everything's done. There's legislation there and it covers it, that if legislation changes, it has to all be done by that. So I'm happy in that respect. Just on making a decision, I think it is difficult for us, but that's the position we put ourselves in at the end of the day. And we come up to the planning committee knowing that we will have to make difficult decisions. And I don't think we should shirk away from making any. It is obviously all, as we're always told, evidence-based, and we're nearly 2 hours now. We're not going to suddenly become, what are we, battery safety and training consultants. We're not going to be planning officers knowing what they're all the different policies that are out there. But we really aren't actually making a decision. We are delegating to officers, and the officers and the consultant, I assume, has had a lot more than 2 hours, probably spent hours and hours and hours on this over however long it's been in. And we just have to take their judgment and their recommendation. The officers have put a lot of work in and saying that they are still recommending that this should be approved. Everything I've heard tonight, there's been a lot said about why this shouldn't go ahead. We have had questioned some of that. The answers I've had back, I'm happy with. I think that is covered everything that I've requested. And personally, I've got no evidence otherwise to say that anything we've been told for that recommendation to approve this is wrong. Unless anybody has got evidence to say otherwise, I think we should be going with the officer's recommendation. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like it, but we are where we are with it. It's got to happen. As I say, there is no evidence that I can see. And just deferring it, if anyone does try and look at deferring this, we need to be asking exactly what evidence we think, and if there's any reason why what we've been told tonight otherwise could be wrong, and where that evidence is going to be coming from. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Booth, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question first and then some commentary. Page 9. Reason for referral to committee. The Head of Planning Services has referred the application to Planning Committee given the large number of representations received and the significant concerns raised. That's why we're seeing it tonight. My question is there a timing issue as to the reason why this is an extraordinary meeting? That's my question, please.
The reason is because we wanted Mr. Gregory to attend in person, and Mr. Gregory wasn't available for the regular March Planning Committee, so we brought an extraordinary meeting forward so that we could find a date that was suitable for Mr. Gregory to attend.
I find that quite unusual, but I accept the response. Andy, thank you. Right. Like probably and hopefully everybody here, I've read the documentation thoroughly. I'll come back to some of the points that members have made, Chairman, if I may, in turn. However, I refer to page 16, 17 and 18. As a hardened member of the Planning Committee and planning system, I find it extraordinarily difficult to look at some of the representations made and actually hang a hat on planning conditions. So I question why officers have systematically copied some of those representations objecting to the scheme and are clearly not planning considerations. So that gives me grave concern to start with, Chairman. Several comments have been made this evening regarding the Grenfell Tower. I find that completely misleading and an unfortunate comment to make in this meeting. Why? The only consistency between what we're looking at tonight and the Grenfell Tower is Kent Fire and Rescue Service, who were deployed at the fire at Grenfell Tower with drone products to assist with that fire in situ. That's the only similarity. It is not a battery storage facility at Grenfell Tower. I'm also concerned to read the commentary from Dunkirk Parish Council on page 15. Now, many of us in Swale will recognise that when there isn't much of a story around, people go to the SS Montgomery. Oh my God, Mr. Chairman, it is there again. They refer to a blast from the SS Montgomery. I again ask you, what has that got to do with this? And it has nothing to do with this. So people are putting things into, respectfully, other members' minds about what could or couldn't happen. So they're just kind of focus areas. Commentary is also made about warning the public about a fire, warning the public to keep away. There was a very large fire on the Isle of Sheppey recently. It was publicised through radio, television, Kent Fire and Rescue Services, I believe KCC, and I believe Swale Borough Council. And it stated, keep your windows and doors shut and keep away. Mr. Chairman, there is video footage of hundreds of people flocking to the site to see the fire. I ask you. So when we come back to saying, how are we going to advise people? You can advise people, but there is an appetite to see a fire. Seriously. Another question, if I can, before I carry on. Mention was made about consultation with the Environment Agency. On this application, are they a statutory consultee? As a yes or no, please.
No.
Thank you very much. I thought it was clear in the representations in the report, so thank you for that. I'm respectful to commentary made relating to the technical issue of this application. However, members of the Planning Committee are required to do a little bit of homework. For example, if there is a site in deepest, darkest Faversham that I'm not aware of, I'm not duty-bound to call for a site meeting to go and look at it. I've got to go out on a Sunday or any other day and go and look at it myself. And that would also go for a topic that falls outside our more normal route. So we're not talking about housing extensions or large-scale developments or a shop frontage. We're not talking about that. And I would suggest that if members are willing to make commentary objecting against this application, who furthermore say, oh, I don't understand it, I don't understand the technicalities of it, I come back to a very hard lesson learned many years ago by some of my colleagues in this committee, when the comment was made, anybody that states in this meeting that they are going to object against it, Mr. Chairman, should support that objection by a legitimate planning reason why they should object. Now, I've sat here, as Councillor Harrison has, when the chairman has been forced to ask the question, so we're not voting for it, give me a reason to object. And it's been silent because there's been no substantial reason to object. Now, I come back to the point in question. This council has employed a professional service to look at the application and give their professional opinion on it. And we've heard Mr. Gregory this evening, and I'll just press pause on that if I may. Mr. Gregory has allowed the time to answer questions from members. He has allowed the time to consult with our planning colleagues and answer appropriately. There is a hard and fast system of public speaking in this chamber, and that's what it is. There is a discretion through the chairman to allow that 3 minute to extend, and I understand that. But generally, it's 3 minutes. That is known. So I find it a little bit tough that people say, I want a bit more time. So just get that one clear. So what we have is we have professional advice on the application. We have professional advice from Kent Farm Rescue Service. We have professional advice from the health and safety. And we do, because the health and safety say, we don't comment on these. And I'm sorry if that goes against what people believe or what people think, but that is a statement. So questioning the health and safety executive, you will not have a leg to stand on. Finally, Chairman, I've got to come back to the commentary regarding I don't understand it. In a planning appeal situation, you will not have a leg to stand on if you state that. You will neither have a leg to stand on in a court of law. So I urge members that have clearly read the documentation and clearly understood the recommendation from officers and our external support to vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get on to that, we've all been sitting down for the last 2 hours, so I suggest we take a 10-minute break and return at 21:13. Thank you. Right, okay, I call this meeting back to order. Our next speaker, or next member that wants to speak is Councillor Palmer, please.
Thank you, Chair. There is a lot of information to take in, and first reading the report, I started on Sunday, and it all seemed quite honky-dory. However, I do have some serious concerns, and I don't think the case has been made tonight that that this is actually a safe option, and I think I am minded to be voting against it. I have searched for some time for the terrorism bit, and I can't find any mention of terrorism in the reports. However, what does concern me, I think this has been rushed to the committee, and we are expected to make a very technical assessment on something that has been rushed here. I think Councillor Booth picked up on that point, an extraordinary one to satisfy someone's diary. However, there were some very notable people who put comments on the portal. They were not covered in the assessment by BST, the consultancy service. In fact, on the 22nd, and it was mentioned that it was sent round to members on the 23rd, was the response to them. And that concerns me because that's a breach of Section 100D of the Local Government Act 1972. There should be 5 clear working days, not including weekends, not including the day of the meeting, and not including the day of the announcement of the meeting or the publication of this. So this is countering people who have put very technical information and arguments why this shouldn't be approved. And I don't feel they've had sufficient time to respond to this. So I think we're trying to make a decision blind, not hearing all the arguments for and against. But I feel very uneasy about approving this application for a battery safety management plan, because I feel that this is putting the public at risk. It is putting public safety at risk. And I think when you're approving a battery safety management plan, well, it doesn't fall into the normal planning system, does it? Where the material considerations are X, Y, and Z, and they're quite clear. This is my judgment. And my judgment is what I've heard tonight, because I came here actually thinking I was quite in favour of this. It seemed quite hunky-dory. Kent Fire Brigade's in favour of it. But I have serious concerns. And nothing has convinced me tonight that this is safe. And unless I hear something otherwise, I will be voting against it on the grounds of safety for public safety. Thank you.
Councillor Booth, my apologies, we didn't get the answers to your questions. I realised I'd skipped over that bit, so officers, oh dear. That 10 minutes was a long time. Do you remember?
My question's related to the reasoning why we're seeing this as an extraordinary meeting, which you've already answered. My question related to the Environment Agency, which you've already answered. I made a lot of commentary, and I'm respectful and thankful for the Chairman for allowing me to do so. I do have more to say, but I'm happy to listen to the debate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Councillor Perkin.
Thanks, Chair. I guess just to come back on some of the things that have been said by others. Yes, all of us signed up to become councillors and to put ourselves in a position to have to make difficult decisions, and as the members of the planning committee to make difficult planning decisions here and there. But this, to me, just doesn't feel like a planning decision. I've said it before. It's beyond the realms of a planning decision. There's no planning considerations. As Mr. Byrne said, it would have to be linked to comments from external bodies or external agencies or something that has come up through the debate this evening. And at the moment, I don't see any of the planning considerations that we are fully trained to put in as reasons for an approval or an objection being relevant to this particular application. In terms of speaking, Councillor Booth spoke about not having a leg to stand on in terms of questioning the HSE. But I do think that we should question the lack of response to what is quite an incredibly significant project, and we also have very little reference to success or failure or risks from elsewhere, because this is a newly emerging industry. This is one of the biggest projects that has ever been put together, and we don't really have any reference for comparing it to others. So the HSE, we might not have a leg to stand on with questioning them, but we should question them anyway. It's our residents. We're put here to represent them. They've spent hours and hours putting together lots of quite detailed arguments as to why this is not appropriate. And so we should be voicing those, whether that is a planning consideration or not. It's up to us to make the decisions as to what an application is approved or objected to on. But having public reference and public speakers and public input is really important for all of our planning applications. It's how we make really good informed decisions. But I just can't get past the fact that this is not there. I cannot even think, and as Councillor Harrison said, you know, there has to be legislative reasons to turn it down, because we are going to have to provide those if we say that if the committee is minded to object to the application and disagree with the officer recommendation. But how are we supposed to do that if we are using planning considerations on an application which does not comply with putting a planning consideration on it as a reason? It's incredibly difficult to do that. And I feel like we're almost been put into a corner in having an application which is completely irrelevant to planning law. So that's all I've got to say about that, really.
Thank you. I'd just like to refer back to one of Councillor Perkins' questions earlier, and that was about the impermeable bund. Did you get an answer to that? So how is it? How does it stop water coming out?
So the floor is impermeable. It's an impermeable hard surface, and the bund is impermeable as well. And the gate is a solid locking gate that will keep water in. But there's also, as part of the strategy for fire water, there are what are called, sorry, I'm going to have to refer to Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, so it's section 8.5 of the battery safety management plan, if you look under fire water pollution. Okay, so to be fair, a lot of these issues raised tonight are actually contained in the battery safety management plan. So it's one comment I think should be made. So it says, section 125, 8.5, the electrical compound comprises of an impermeable bund as detailed in the original submissions. The battery area is split into zones, with each zone separate from one another, with each zone's runoff water is directed into individual penstock outlets, which allow each zone to be isolated in sections from the main carrier drainage. Okay. In the event of a fire scenario, initially the fire alarm system would stop the on-site pumped runoff system to allow for the penstock outlets of the effective area to be isolated. Fire water can then be monitored and tested at each penstock outlet during and after the management of a fire event. So that's 126 and 127 as well. Okay.
Okay, thank you. One thing that seems to be coming up is there's a few different concerns. Are we able to put, if members were to approve this, are we able to put conditions on the approval, or if it is approval?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if members are minded to approve this condition, we can put conditions on this application because it's come through the Secretary of State as a development consent order.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Yeah, with that in mind, what were the conditions attached to the development consent order in terms of consulting the HSE? That was one. And then can we send the statutory consultee, as in, and also Mr. Gregory's report, can we send that to statutory consultees? And with the battery safety management plan, it seems that there's quite a lot of open-ended risks, as Mr. Gregory was saying, that will be taken up by the contractor? And should we be looking at it once all that information is available, rather than trying to make a decision before those other bits of safety information are available?
Do we have a page reference for where the requirements are?
Yeah, so if members can turn to paragraph 3.10 of the committee report, that sets out details of requirement 3 in full, and you'll see under part 4 of that there is a requirement that the relevant planning authority must consult with the Health and Safety Executive and Kent Fire and Rescue Services before determining an application.
It's just no comment or no reply from the HSE isn't a consultation. That's the key point, I think. So them not replying is not a consult. It's not communicating. So can we give them more information and ask them to come back with that? Can we defer to ask them to give an answer?
We've got other statutory consultees, as we can see in here, that don't wish to provide a comment, and on most planning applications, the Environment Agency might not want to reply to us. KCC may decide the application is too small for them to reply to. So, as was said earlier, we can't compel anyone to, we're not Parliament, we can't compel anyone to answer our questions. Who do I have next? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, perhaps we could get our MP to take that up with the HSE on our behalf in his last few months with us. A simple question for Mr. Gregory, I think, please. Solar panels, PV panels that we fit to our houses. At one point in time, they used to be it was the solar panels provided you with the electricity, and anything that was left over you could sell back to the grid. Now, a lot of these solar companies are offering battery storage packs with their solar panels, which obviously, as we know, are on a much smaller scale than we're talking about here. But how do those battery packs and the safety and the positioning of those battery packs within our houses in any way compare with the battery packs that we're talking about, or be they on a much larger scale?
Sorry, I'm not really quite sure what you're trying to answer there. So, yes, they are domestic battery energy storage systems, obviously of much lower energy density. And yes, there are locations that you should not locate in your house. But, for example, do not locate it in your roof space or in your kitchen, for example. There are well-known sort of advice and safety for domestic battery energy storage, and you should be going with a certified installer that knows of the safe places to locate that.
Councillor Booth.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a point of order, Mr. Chairman. That is not what we're looking at today. We're not looking at a domestic application or installation, and I think we are in danger of straying off the subject. Thank you.
Just trying to get a comparison, Councillor Booth, because obviously there are safety measures with both installations.
Councillor Clark, probably through the chairman, respectfully.
Thank you, councillors. If no one else wishes, Councillor Hull.
Yeah, I think it's been a very lengthy evening. I wouldn't say it was fruitless. It's been quite an education. But for me, none of us members are professionals in this field. And what we've got to rely on tonight is either the word of Paul Gregory and Sir David Mosley. Really, they're the only true professionals here. If I'd got to believe one or the other, I think, respect either one or the other. There's nothing else here that will convince me otherwise.
I was just about to move to a vote, but we seem to have lots more hands. Councillor Harrison first, please.
When I spoke earlier, I said that we needed to, we as a committee have sought assurance from the consultant we've employed. We sought assurance from our statutory consultees, not all of whom bothered replying, but we have had lengthy communication with KFRS, and we would also seek assurance from. I think if there were any incidences once this place was built, it seems to be quite a long way down the road, if there were any incidences, it wouldn't be HSE who turned up to sort it out, it'd be the KFRS. So I would place great emphasis on the assurance that I see in their number of communications. But I did say earlier on, what are the specific parameters on which we must make our decision? Because they are, in my humble opinion, very narrow. And number two, I asked the question about the risk assessments and the evacuation plans, which understand until the place is built, you can't actually do them. But who do they go to? Who actually sees them? Perhaps that's the HSE's job. But at some point down the line, all this tonight is in the public domain. We're talking about a number of issues. I think the parameters on which we make the decision are very narrow, but it doesn't alter the fact that there are a number of concerns, as I've just mentioned, which at some point people in the community wouldn't mind knowing about. Or does that become some sort of internal business type thing that never goes outside the walls? Thanks.
So, Section 4, emergency response protocols, basically outlines all the processes to put these procedures into place and covers the types of operations. So, for example, with the energy storage system, there's already an operations manual, okay, to use for that. So a lot of the operational stuff's in place, you just need an operator appointed. So if you go through the battery safety management plan, it actually points out who's involved internally, okay, and the external bodies. So, for example, the emergency response team, point 53, point B, liaising with the local emergency services and making them aware of the detailed project programme, identify key milestones such as battery delivery dates, installation commencement, commissioning commencement, and any other periods of construction which may pose a higher hazard of fire hazards being present. Now, obviously, I don't know in this local area, whether you have an emergency resilience forum, for example, that might also be a consultee in that sort of process. But typically, you're talking fire, health, police. So it just seems to me, I don't know the local area, but there is an obligation and a process stated in the safety management plan, how this is set up and who they're liaising with.
Councillor Speed, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking at the legal advice obtained by the Faversham Society dated the 24th of February, and they identify 9 issues that are unaddressed and unresolved in BST&T's initial report and also their supplementary subsequent report. These include the need for measures related to the increased risk of explosions for LFP batteries, the need to seek hazardous substances consent, the use of the minimum recommended container spacing for such a large BESS when there is experience of 23-metre flames, the 5-fold expansion of the BESS at some unspecified future date, the previous worldwide experience of BESS failures as required in the NFCC guidance, failure to consider the possibility of multiple simultaneous fires, failure to consider or reference the authoritative independent Atkins report on airborne hazards in order to downplay the risk of potentially lethal toxic fumes in favour of their own cursory Hawley analysis, a serious undersizing of the amount of fire water potentially required based on actual experience elsewhere. And finally, failure to provide details of the potentially dangerous fire suppression system in the CATL NSC Plus system. I would suggest that if we're looking for reasons not to agree with the officer's recommendation, that would be a good place to start.
Okay, we're currently speaking.
And if I could just add, Chairman, when we come to the vote, could I request a recorded vote, please?
I'll second that.
I'll defer to Mr. Gregory in a minute, but if we go through those 9 points, the need to seek hazardous substances consent is addressed in tabled update number 2. If hazardous substances consent is required, that's a separate application and another hurdle that the applicant would need to go through, but it doesn't prevent the determination of the battery management safety plan. Point number 3, the minimum container spacing. I mean, that is set out in the National Fire Standards, and Kent Fire and Rescue Services are happy with that spacing, and that is set out again in their detailed response under Appendix 1 of the committee report. Likewise, point 8, the undersizing of the amount of fire water. Kent Fire and Rescue Services have clearly stated that the amount that is being proposed in the Battery Safety and Management Plan is acceptable. Given that Kent Fire and Rescue Services will be the emergency service that will deal with these incidents, I'd like to think that we would give significant weight to the comments that they make, particularly because they very specifically addressed those 2 points about spacing and the amount of fire water in their comments. I'll defer now to Mr. Gregory with regard to the other points. Thank you.
So we already covered the Atkins report earlier. Okay. So a lot of the points on the fire suppression system, we covered that as well, and I do have more detail. So point 1, the explosion risks of LFP. The system mitigation and hazard prevention capabilities that mitigate that risk are the data analytics. They're integrated into the battery management and energy management system. Capabilities themselves of those controls and monitoring systems, the gas detection equipment, the gas exhaust system to prevent explosion levels reaching 25% of the lower flammable limit, the lower explosive limit, which again, details are contained in my reports and the final review to interested parties. Okay, covers this in significant detail. Site-specific explosion prevention review, which, as mentioned, will take place if planning permission was granted. The emergency response plan basically leverages all this information and capabilities and implements into the incident response protocols. Okay. The 6 metre spacing, as set out in my final sort of safety review, I show similar systems that are spaced 7 and 10 feet away, and in full burn testing has demonstrated that propagation does not occur. And so I just refer committee members back to that. And again, Kent Fire and Rescue's comments, and also just to point out that NFCC, these guidelines and local fire and rescue services on any project have the authority to make variations to those guidelines. I might also add that Matt Deadman is the lead officer for the National Fire Chiefs Council, and basically is writing, formulating and reviewing that policy on a 6-monthly basis. I might also add that that 6 metre guideline is based on a 2017 FM Global Data Sheet 5-33, which was basically revised in 2023. Those guidelines have been brought down for LFP systems from 6 metres from 1.5 to 2.5 metres. So I'm not saying that the NFCC are going to reduce those guidelines totally in line with that, but that's just to give you an idea on the level of testing that's demonstrated. It's safer to locate test systems have been fully tested in closer proximity. What I would say about this is because a full-scale burn test has not been carried out on this system, then it's diligent to use that 6 metre spacing. With regards to the 23 metres flames that mentioned by the Faversham Society, now I can go very technical on this, but I won't, but basically there was no gas exhaust system. The fire suppression system was a clean agent system which compressed all the explosive gases to floor level. It was left for 3 hours. It was already seeped at floor level at quite a distance away from the container. The fire service opened the door, introduced oxygen, there was a spark. So basically you had a stream of the gas that ignited. It was a very short flame. It blew firefighters through a fence, so they also landed sort of at that distance away. Fortunately, they weren't killed because it was so low-lying. However, you know, that fireball would have lasted less than a couple of seconds. You know, that will not threaten the thermal integrity and thermal insulation of a BESS enclosure at 6 metres. Okay. Now, and also the explosion prevention systems and the monitoring systems in these containers are far in advance of what were in those other containers, and you don't actually have a fire suppression system that's going to contribute to that explosive risk. Okay. So with regards to point 5, previous worldwide experience of BESS failures, BESS failure experience is integrated into NFPA 855 requirements and the requisite standards and certifications. Those were updated last year, and the system for Cleve Hill integrates all of those latest changes with additional changes that are provisions that are laid out in my report in some detail. Okay. Failure to consider the possibility of multiple simultaneous fires. As mentioned, a final site-specific risk analysis will assess credible worst-case scenarios. Okay, that's based on once the site-specific risks are taken into account outside of the reports that already exist that I've reviewed myself and are fit for purpose and conform to the highest specifications, okay, and standards. The emissions report does actually consider 2 simultaneous burning BESS systems, as referred to earlier, and again also just in the feedback on the Atkins report as well. So from a perspective of those 9 points and the ones that Andy has answered, I think that covers those sort of hopefully relatively clearly.
Councillor Hunt, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to propose some conditions, if that's okay. The first is that the, get the right name for this, the Construction Emergency Response Plan is submitted and agreed in writing with us, so that is at least out there in the public domain and can be seen, and statutory authorities commenting on that, as well as the risk assessment and the evacuation procedure. If that is all submitted to us, all those organisations are in there who we need to consult with. If we can do that, then that is all out there on the public domain. Make sure that it's all on our website and can be seen by everybody. And also, I don't know if this will probably be an informative, that the applicant engages with the Health and Safety Executive throughout this, and hopefully they will get a response from them, and they will have to under legislation anyway. But I think that may be an informative rather than a condition. But if the officers have got any comments, whether any of those are possible, and if they are, I'll propose those and leave the word in delegating to officers of what's needed.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Yes, we could impose conditions as suggested. We would recommend a trigger of prior to the first use of the site, so that it allows the developer the opportunity to get together the risk assessments and progress with the operator's licence and so on. So, yeah, that would be our recommendation. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. If that's okay to propose, then hopefully someone will second it. That'd be good. Thanks.
Can I just ask a question on the conditions then? I mean, as I understand it, you're saying, can you provide your risk assessments? But is that lawful? That's one of the questions. What is that an actual lawful condition? And then, what do we, if it's a condition, do we have the expertise to decide whether they are actually a suitable and sufficient risk assessment? Thank you.
Well, in terms of whether it's lawful, I mean, I suppose we're in a similar situation to where we are now. We're talking about the safety of the system. But obviously a bit further down the line when the applicant would have had the opportunity to carry out those works. It's a bit chicken and egg at the moment because there's a requirement to carry out these assessments during the construction and operation process, but they can only do that when they're a certain way down the line. But they need to have approval of the battery management safety plan before they can put a spade in the ground to provide the storage system. It seems to me that it would not be unreasonable to require details of those plans, bearing in mind that they relate essentially to the issue of battery safety, which we're debating now. But yes, you're right, at the end of the day, we will be led by other consultees and organisations, and we may well find ourselves in the same position where, you know, we may well have comments from Kent Fire and Rescue Services. I doubt as though we'll have anything from the Health and Safety Executive. And we may need to employ a consultant to review those plans for us again. And let's go round again. Yeah.
Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit concerned about the statement about the Kent Fire Brigade and the NFCC guidance states that 1,900 litres per minute for a minimum of 2 hours. Which is what is recommended here. Yet we've heard and experienced that other sites have used, where a fire has occurred, they've used far in excess of that amount of water. Yet they're saying use less on the biggest site in the country or maybe Europe. So how do they come to that conclusion? I would have thought you need more water. And on those grounds, I would think that the recommendations are totally inadequate. Thank you.
Kent Fire and Rescue aren't here to respond, unfortunately.
Yeah, so in the final safety review, I go into the strategies that have developed since those incidents. So first of all, boundary cooling, how far less water is required, how you're actually able to real-time monitor the internal temperatures of surrounding equipment, okay? And as I specified, in all those incidents mentioned, none of those systems had an internal sprinkler system or spray system, which require far less water at far lower rates, which are designed to manage the thermal runaway process, okay? So the whole point about the learning from those incidents is you shouldn't do that, and you don't need to do that. The report is very clear in that, and also the appendix to those reports is from the International Association of Fire Chiefs, which in a simple one-page document talks you exactly through the process and the questions you have there, okay?
I'm sorry, but I'm not confident that this was said probably time and time again at every other application for this type of site, and we're now saying it again. You're cutting corners, you're trying to cut costs, and I would suggest double, treble that amount. And I think I would feel a little bit safer, and I think the residents might feel a little bit safer. They've got a good backup of water to put this problem out, should it occur. And I don't agree that looking at stats and figures, look at experiences, look at the facts, and that hasn't happened.
Councillor Marchington, please. I'm expecting some wise words.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just to get back quickly, briefly to the risk assessment method statements. First of all, you need the site-specific assessment, and that's the one where all the facts have to be listed down. We've had a lovely evening tonight discussing, and some late nights myself, but we're basically talking analytic jargon, which is people's opinions against another opinion, all very similar. But when you get back to when you come to doing the risk assessments and methods, it's a site-specific assessment has to be done first, and then you have to state all the actual, what quantities are, what voltages are, all those things have to be coming, and then your risk assessments and method statements, how you go about doing safe work to overcome the site-specific statements. Just to put a point of how you go about. I'm a site man, so so thank you. Hey. Yes, I seconded it. With that.
Excellent. So we have a proposal for conditions on the table, duly seconded. If there's any debate on that? No, then we'll move to the vote on the conditions, whether to add these conditions. All those, sorry, did you want to record your vote on conditions or just on the main item? Thank you. All those in favour of adding conditions, please show. All those against, please show. And abstentions? So that is lost. So we won't be adding conditions. If there's no further debate, I think we should vote on the main item. So, it's recorded vote, have we got the sheet? Kerry? Councillor Booth.
4.
Councillor Simon Clark.
Against.
Councillor Golding.
Against.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hunt.
4.
Councillor Jays, 4. Councillor Marchington. Councillor Martin. Councillor Harrison. 4. Councillor Palmer.
Against.
Councillor Perkins. Don't hit me. Councillor Speed. Councillor Stephen.
Against.
Councillor Thompson.
Chair, point of order, sorry.
Go on.
When you started the meeting, Councillor Thompson wasn't in the room.
Officers concur. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Vales.
Against.
Councillor Watson.
Abstain.
Councillor Winkless.
Against.
Against. So the results were 5 for, 10 against, 1 abstention and 2 abstentions, I suppose. So the main motion is lost. We now need a motion to move forwards. And before we do that, I'd like to agree to extend standing orders, as we're going to be a bit longer. Thank you, members. So who has a proposal, please? Councillor Palmer.
Well, I would propose that, as it's a battery management safety plan, that the evidence hasn't been produced to provide a sufficient and suitable battery safety management plan in the eyes of the committee. Thank you.
Is that a reason for refusal?
Well, it must be a reason for refusal. If you're asking to approve a battery safety management plan and the feeling of the members of the committee is that it's unsafe, it's, as I said earlier, this is outside the norms of saying, is it, you know, is the sunlight coming in, or does it affect someone's view or things like that? This affects safety. And I don't feel that the case has been made that this is a safe plant. And that must be the reason for refusal, safety, in the interest of public safety. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I talk to that?
And I'll come straight to you, thank you.
We need to, if members are seeking to refuse this, they need to be very clear and substantiate what the reasons for refusal are and why the battery safety management plan is, in their view, deficient. That needs to be clearly made, because if we don't clearly make that, then we are at risk of not being able to substantiate what the reason for refusal is, or give any indication to the applicant or others what is deficient about the battery safety management plan. Thank you.
Councillor Booth.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I did make mention that should this not proceed under the officer's advice, that a substantial reason needs to be given. And a substantial reason against professional advice would be substantial. And here we are, we're scrabbling around trying to find a reason. There is a lot of passion surrounding this application. And I think it just needs to calm down a bit.
Thank you. Under 3.1.39.23 of the Constitution, I'm now required to invite the head of planning in, whether they want to request that the committee consider if the application should be deferred. Do officers recommend deferral, or should I carry on? No. This is what the Constitution says. So I know we haven't. I seek the officers' advice. The officers give their advice. Then we decide. So we get the advice first.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of whether we should defer this item, I think we need to come back to what is it members would be deferring this item for officers to go away and consider. As Andy and Mr Gregory have set out, we have sought comments from Kent Fire and Rescue. We have consulted the the Health and Safety Executive. We have liaised with the Secretary of State, and the advice from the Secretary of State was to get independent advice, and we have that this evening in the form of Paul Gregory. So to my view, there is limited value in deferring the item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Winklers, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I was going to second Councillor Palmer's reasons for refusal, but now I understand we're looking at a deferral. No, I've got that wrong. Okay, sorry. Okay, but that's so I second Councillor Palmer's reasons for review.
Thank you. In terms of Councillor Palmer's reason, insufficient information being submitted, if we're going to go down that route, we need to be identifying what is sufficient in the management plan. At the moment, we're not identifying where the plan is sufficient, and unless we identify that, we could be at potential risk of costs should this application go to appeal.
I think it's deficient in the areas of its response to terrorism. It's deficient in the response to, is there sufficient water to actually deal with the fire that's been put there? That's all, and I'm sure that there's other reasons that people could help us out, but there are several reasons that I think there's the danger to the public. I don't think the emergency services all the emergency services have been consulted. The ambulance service, the NHS. I think the impact on that part of on that part of Kent would be quite severe, and I don't think that the management safety plan has considered them aspects, and so is lacking in that area. Thank you.
The officers have asked for an adjournment, and I believe that's constitutional, so we will adjourn until the officers return. Thank you. Right, okay, members, we're back. I'd like to extend standing orders just one more time, hopefully, if all can agree to that. Thank you very much, members. So first up, in discussion with officers, I'd like to propose the following, that the BSMP fails to demonstrate that risk to public safety has been adequately assessed by virtue of a lack of on-site water storage capacity, insufficient access to the battery storage enclosure in the event of a fire, and a lack of detailed emergency evacuation plan and risk assessment, and as such, the proposal will be contrary to the Local Plan 2017 and the National Planning Policy Framework. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that, but can we add something to it?
I might allow it.
The gas suppression system, I believe even Mr Gregory said it hasn't been tested, and it's a it doesn't appear to be a fail-safe system, so if your control mechanisms is an untested system, it adds to the lack of confidence in the system, and it only takes one to fail and the system is no good.
I think we've got enough reasons for refusal. Remember, every reason we add on could eventually cost us more. I'd like to bring the officers in on costings, because I know the new MPPF says something about it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to come back to the risk of cost should members go down the route of refusing this application tonight. As we all know, there was the new MPPF that came out just before Christmas, and that does set out there is a risk of costs where members of the committee go against officer recommendation, and we need to carefully consider in this case, in the event of an appeal, are we going to be able to find someone to represent the council to defend this reason for refusal? And in the event that we don't, we will be left in a position where we are unable to defend the appeal and will be at substantial risk of costs. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I totally agree with what you've said there, but there's also something else that's niggling me, is that we've got two experts in the room, and I wouldn't say one's better than the other, but one has not had the chance to come back, maybe on our behalf, with the expertise that we would need to make a decision. And so we've been not allowed that chance. And I feel that although Mr Gregory's done a wonderful job in telling us everything, we have another expert that's saying maybe that's not quite right, and we could actually question on our behalf as members, then that would give us more confidence in making a better decision. So maybe that can be brought in at the next meeting or whatever. Only it seems crazy. We don't know. The officers have got an expert in that's telling us one thing, and we've got another expert in the room that's saying something different, but not been able to give us sufficient, it hasn't had sufficient time to actually challenge that. And I think next time round we should use both experts, and then we could be nearer to making a better decision.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to refer to the Constitutional Working Group. I think this is an exceptional case. The fact that it's a DCO that's been we're then punished with, because 3 plan inspectors have decided, yes, this application can go through, but the council can deal with the lowly bits of it. So I do think that is something for the Constitutional Working Group going forwards. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a point of clarification first. I think earlier commentary was made regarding the water storage on site. I think just to clarify that water storage is not to put a potential fire out. That is not what it's there for. It is to restrict and assist the additional equipment from not catching fire. So that's a very important point. The standard remit for Kent Fire and Rescue Service is at the scene of an electric bike or an electric vehicle is to let it burn. That is the standard remit. It is not to put it out. I'm sure Mr Gregory will concur. In situations of motor vehicles and bikes, the only satisfactory and recognised way to put out the fire is complete submersion, and that is impractical. So that's the first point. I think the second point is, and I will make it again, Mr. Chairman, is I urged members to be very careful on how they voted. Exposing this council to what I would suggest will be a considerable financial claim against what we are now proposing would jeopardise not just this council but the residents of Swale, and that puts us in a very dangerous position. So I urge reconsideration. Thank you.
Councillor Perkin.
Thanks, Chair. Given how unprecedented this application is and the lack of ability to properly look at planning considerations in terms of putting in an objection because they're not relevant to the application, is there no mechanism by where we can send this back to the Secretary of State and say, you have said that this is permitted development, it is up to you to decide what you deem safe or not safe. It should not be at local government level. If it is decided at national level, and that we should send it back and ask them to deal with it. Is there not a mechanism in government that we can do that?
Regrettably not. The development consent order is being granted by the Secretary of State, and the conditions and requirements are passed down to the local authority to deal with. As we've said previously, we have gone back to the Secretary of State and highlighted the issues that we've had in determining the application, and the response has been that we should seek expert advice.
As usual, we've been dumped on from a higher place. Councillor Harrison.
In what you read out, I didn't manage to write it all down quick enough, but you did mention risk assessments, and that was clearly in the proposal to go with the officer recommendation. That was put in as a condition. So I think it's very. I don't think that we can use it as a reason for refusal, because it would have been dealt with under a condition for approval. So I don't think you can use it twice. I mean, if I was the inspector, I'd be saying, well, how can you say risk assessments? They do get the minutes. They could well look at the old vid. It said quite clearly, we can condition risk assessments, evacuation plans, and whatever else it was that I wrote down. So you can't really use that as grounds for refusal.
Going back to your point, Councillor Perkin, this is us sending it back to, this is the only way we have to send it up to PINS. Unfortunately, it'll come with great cost probably.
Thanks. Obviously, just to be clear, officers do not agree with the reasons for refusal. We've drafted those reasons for refusal based on what's been put to us by members. Members had the opportunity to vote to consider using a planning condition to deal with the risk assessment and the safety plan, the emergency response plan, and voted that that was not appropriate. So that's the reason why that's included on the reason as well. But as has been said, we think that there is a very low chance of success in defending that appeal, and a high risk that there will be costs against us if those are pursued. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I know we've already taken a vote and voted to refuse this, and now we're looking for reasons for refusal. But I go back to what has been said about the other expert that's in the room, and what I said earlier, and I don't know whether it's precedented, Mr. Chairman, but I would, at this point, to try and save this authority costs, I would recommend deferral to another meeting so that we could hear from the other expert in the room and give us a more clear identity as to where to go with this. So if I don't know if I have a seconder for that, but that's what I would propose.
We already have one motion on the floor. We have to deal with that one first. But
Thank you. Just to come back in on the point around the independent assessment that's been undertaken by the council, Paul Gregory has been instructed on behalf of the council, and he is representing the council on this case. I appreciate we may have another expert in the room, however, he is representing the Faversham Society. The independent expert for the purposes of this is Paul Gregory. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, through you, Chair, then would Mr Gregory represent us at appeal if the motion on the floor, I'm putting you on the spot there, Mr Gregory, but
No, it wouldn't be appropriate for Mr Gregory to represent us at appeal given his recommendations.
Councillor Hall.
Making a comment. I know a lot's been said tonight. In all the years I've been in the planning, 9 years now, I think this is the most unjust and unfair meeting I've ever been in my life. Every one of our members are all in the dark about this. We're relying on Paul Gregory to give us all the information. We haven't heard our source speak enough. He got 3 minutes, that's all he got. So we've had to make a decision that we're not even qualified to make. And I'll be honest with you, it is a weak answer you've got, and it may probably will lose an appeal. It's so unfair to what's happened tonight. We should have this deferred, saying it's too late, and get a proper consultation.
I think the same constitution has been, well, regarding planning, has been in place for them 9 years. This is how it's dealt with. If the council needs an expert in the field, you get your expert in. We've got planning consultants covering various roles. They are planning experts that we've brought in to the council. So he's basically equivalent officer. He's our consultant. Going forwards at appeal, if the other gentleman in the room wants to represent the council, then that is something that can be considered. But for the decision tonight, it is the way it is, unfortunately. Councillor Booth.
Thank you, Chairman. We're going to go round and round and round unless somebody makes a proposal, which I'm happy to do. My proposal is, and I understand what you've just said about a proposal, that the original proposer for refusal withdraws that and a proper proposal is put on the floor to get this application approved. Because in the absence of any substance to support refusal, as I said, this council will be financially exposed. And we have a responsibility to ensure that is not the case. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
I believe there's a proposal on the floor, which the chair proposed and was seconded, and we should be talking to that proposal. And I may suggest that we move to the vote. Thank you.
I've just got Councillor Speed, and then I believe we can move to the vote. Councillor Speed.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of potential additional reasons to justify our decision to vote against the officer's recommendation, regarding the 9 issues that were identified by the lawyers for the Faversham Society that they felt were unaddressed and unresolved, we've had a response from Mr. Gregory, but I'm not satisfied that those issues have been adequately addressed. So could we ask for a second independent expert to give us a view on those 9 issues to ascertain whether that advice is correct? And then secondly, we are being asked to make a decision on safety in the absence of any input from the Health and Safety Executive, who are the government body who have a statutory duty to advise on that. Can we not say we're unable to make a decision without input from them and go back to them and insist that they do give us a response? Because it seems to be an abrogation of their duties that they're not engaging with this process. Thank you, Chairman.
With the proposal on the floor, after the meeting, we can ask for an independent expert to look at the 9 points, but not tonight. And what's your second part?
the fact that we've had no input from the Health and Safety Executive, and really that is their job, and we should go back to them and insist on getting a view from them.
I think officers have already banged their head against the wall enough, or banged their head on their door enough trying to get an answer out of them. They will not answer. They will not answer other local authorities. I do suggest we speak to our MPs, as we have too, and see if they can bang their heads on the door, but I don't think that's an issue we're going to resolve tonight. If there's no further discussion, we'll move to the vote. Did you want to record your vote on this one as well?
Yes, please, and could you please repeat the wording, because I can't recall it.
No problem. So the BSMP fails to demonstrate that risks to public safety have been adequately assessed by virtue of a lack of on-site water storage capacity, insufficient access to the battery storage enclosure in the event of a fire, and a lack of a detailed emergency evacuation plan and risk assessment. And as such, the proposal would be contrary to Local Plan 2017 and the National Planning Policy Framework. Councillor Palmer.
Yep, for.
Councillor Booth.
Against.
Councillor Clark. Councillor Golding. Councillor Hall. Councillor Perkins. Slate. 4. Councillor Hunt. Gone. Absent. Councillor Marchington.
Abstain.
Councillor Martin. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Speed.
For.
Councillor Stephen.
For.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Vales. Councillor Watson.
Abstain.
Councillor Winkless.
For.
Myself against. Okay, the results are 11 for, 3 against, 2 abstentions and 1 absence. So therefore that motion has succeeded. I hope all members that voted for it do turn up at the appeal. I'd like to thank everyone for the way they've conducted themselves tonight, members, officers and the public gallery. And we'll see you at the next meeting. I close the meeting.